So my name's John Ferris, ophthalmologist.
And my name's Dermot Keogh, optometrist.
Welcome to Eyes and Tomorrow, and a huge thank you to the Irish College of Ophthalmologists for this invitation to record our first live podcast. And we could not have asked for a better guest. A founding father of modern ophthalmology here in Ireland and a pioneer of cataract and refractive surgery in the UK and Europe. Mr. Patrick Condon, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Dermot. This has been a great privilege and a great honour to be interviewed in front of an Irish audience, especially with so many prominent ophthalmologists in the audience. It's an interesting job to write a book, I can assure you. It's no easy project. It's taken about a year and a half of 10 to 12 hours a day, and a lot of thinking and recollections and a lot of memories come back when you sit and think for a long time. And a lot of the memories were really so enjoyable to look back at again, and the numbers of great friends that we've made in ophthalmology over the years have been just fantastic. I think one of the most major advantages of this is that I've been lucky enough to be practicing actively in a most exciting period of ophthalmology where so many advances have been made in our specialties. And even now, despite the fact that we've seen all these developments happen and accepted them as, you know, a matter of fact, we still see more interesting things on the horizon which are fascinating.
So, Paddy, if we hold you there and just go back to your early life, for those who've not read the book, I think the elephant in the room is you're not really Irish, are you? You're half Irish. Your mother was a Lancashire woman, and you were born in Exeter. So a bit of an English refugee in Ireland, really.
Yes, but I had a good Tipperary father.
Well, he went to Rockwell College, Paddy, and I know all about playing rugby against Rock.
So you trained at UCL, and then what brought you over to England, Paddy?
I think when we all qualified in UCD in those days, we were not really made very welcome to hang around. My generation of doctors qualifying in the early 60s, we were all encouraged to leave, and many of us went to the United States to train, but a lot of us headed for the UK and developed our own careers in the training systems in the UK. And in fact, we all did terribly well, and as you can see, many of us came back and helped to develop the services in this country based on what we learned abroad. And
it was that comprehensive training, Paddy, that you had in London, starting off in Croydon and then the Royal Medical Eye Unit, that gave you that overall picture. Because many people in the audience think of you perhaps as a cataract and refractive surgeon who don't know you well, but that grounding in those early days in London meant every aspect, every subspecialty was covered.
I was very fortunate to join the Royal Eye St Thomas's group. I didn't actually try to get into Moorfields, which is rather surprising, because most people thought that the sun and moon shined from Moorfields Hospital. But having, I suppose, a knowledge of Professor Arnold Sorsby's work in medical genetics and Alan Friedman's work in visual fields and a lot of neuro-ophthalmology stuff, I was very fortunate to land myself in a very busy job in the Royal Eye Hospital, which was the only hospital south of the River Thames, as distinct from Moorfields, which was north of the Thames. And that was part of the St Thomas's teaching group. And of course, Harold Ridley did the first cataract operation in 1949 in St Thomas's Hospital, which of course stimulated a lot of anger from the Moorfields group, which were always rivalry in rival contact with the Royal Eye Hospital. But St Thomas's had a very active ophthalmology department, and they had many, many very famous ophthalmologists working there as well, which I was very lucky to be associated with in my training.
And great teaching as well, because for those of you who are not ophthalmologists, there was a very arduous set of exams, the first of which was the primary FRCS, because they didn't have the ophthalmology exams then, and I did that exam as well, Paddy, and you made the mistake I did when the examiner said, "What do you want to be, lad?"
And I said,
rather than saying general surgery, what did you say?
I said I was going to be an ophthalmologist, and of course, with that, this was the primary fellowship in Stephen's Green. They then said, "Okay, let's do the respiratory function tests," and then when I went to the anatomy oral, they said, "I think we ought to do the muscles of the sole of the foot." It couldn't be further from the ophthalmology I was wanting to do at that stage. But that was typical.
And it's interesting, 40 years later, they were doing exactly the same thing. 50 years later, doing the same thing.
There was a plan to try and cut you out of ophthalmology, I think, but they didn't. They failed with me anyway.
And so, with several years behind you, in those great hospitals, you decided to take a bit of study leave, and you didn't go anywhere shabby. You decided on Jamaica, Paddy. You know, nice warm weather for an Irish bloke. And so, tell us about your time there.
Well,
and the sickle cell disease.
It all happened rather fortuitously, in that when I was working as a registrar and senior registrar in St. Thomas's, we had a huge Jamaican population in South London. And I was working with Professor David Hill at that time, who succeeded Arnold Sorsby, and he was professor of the Royal College of Surgeons in the eye department there. And he was a retinal guy, and all the Jamaican patients with retinal problems turned up at his clinic. And we also had a consultant hematologist on the staff called Dr. Huntsman, who was very closely working in abnormal hemoglobins in Cambridge with Professor Lehman, who was a world authority on hemoglobins. And it was that contact that got me in contact with Graham Sargent, who has written a whole book as a world authority on sickle cell disease. And they wanted me to go out and work in the University of West Indies in Dr. Sargent's clinic to document all the ophthalmological findings in sickle cell patients and the different variants. As you know, there's SS, SC, S-thal, and they had huge numbers of patients with sickle cell abnormalities. So that's really how that started. I got a grant from the Keeler Trust and also from the Southwest Metropolitan Hospital to go there and do a couple of months with them. And I was given study leave to do that. So we wrote a lot. I think we wrote about maybe 20 papers altogether, which were published in the American journals, with Dr. Sargent, who's written a book on sickle cell disease. So that was fascinating, and it was another aspect of ophthalmology which I'd never seen before. So even though I was trained to be a cataract surgeon or a surgeon, an ophthalmic surgeon, I was sidetracked completely into that, which was fantastic, really, because Jamaica is a beautiful country, and we had great times. We were really working 24 hours there as well, around the clock, because there was a huge demand for ophthalmology there.
So then you left your wife behind there and did a bit of a road trip to the US, where you went on to Baskin Palmer for Dr. Gass, and then Troutman further down. Tell us about your USA trip.
Yeah, I was a senior registrar stage at that point in time, and it was the usual thing to do at that level before you became a consultant, is to look at the other side of ophthalmology in the United States. And by this stage, I had a lot of contacts from the consultants I'd worked with in London, and I was very fortunate to be asked to do talks in all these departments on what I was doing as a junior doctor, shall we say, at that stage, and any research that we were doing at the time. And I went to Don Gas first in the Baskin Parma, which had so highly regarded, and sat in their clinics, was shown around. I gave a small presentation in each place. I then went up to Ed Mommy at the time, who was professor and head of the department in where was it? Baltimore. Yeah, Baltimore. And then I went to see New York to see Dick Troutman, who was pioneering the whole development of operating microscopes at the time, and was well known to Dermot Pierce, who I was working with in Croydon, who was also developing microscopes at the time with Keeler's. So it was a stage of fantastic development in ophthalmic surgery and technology. And one of the most interesting things was a small group that was set up in Germany called the Intraocular Microsurgery Study Group, which started the whole revolution of fine instruments for ophthalmic surgery. And these were microsurgeons. And Dermot was Dermot Pierce was from Wexford, of course, and a UCD graduate, who was, I think most likely, he was an engineer at heart.
He liked to create some of his own instruments before surgery, didn't he?
He created all the Pierce-Hoskins instruments, the Pierce microscopes, and all of that. And this was the milieu that I grew up in ophthalmology. So hence my interest in surgery. But, as I said here already today, eye healthcare is a huge subject. It's a vast subject. And, we've got to take into account that it's not just cataract surgery. There's a whole... This is why it's so exciting to see medical ophthalmology really booming and coming, and how we're beginning to attract optometrists, technicians, and developing team spirits in the whole specialty. I think it's fascinating to see what's happening now, and I take my hat off to the Irish College for the efforts that they're making in making this work.
And that leads us nicely, Paddy. After 2 years at SIDCUP, where you were a consultant, the call, the pull of Ireland brought you back to Waterford, where your father, of course, had set up the first ophthalmic services in the late 40s and 50s. Implanted the first intraocular lens in Ireland. But when you came back and you were talking to the South East Area Health Board, who seemed like quite a progressive management at that stage with specialty managers, you had a vision which was way before your time of not just hospital services, but community services, educating GPs about red eyes, and looking at that sort of holistic, all of ophthalmology. What were your sort of recollections of that exciting time as you went to develop a population which had gone from 100 to 500,000 in the space of 30 years? You had to rethink things.
Yeah, well, I think I realized straight away when I came back to have to deal as a solo ophthalmologist. I had to deal with a service, not just operating in a room on my own. I needed more ophthalmologists around me, and I needed medical ophthalmologists. Otherwise, we'd never get to the root of diagnosing the problems. And I felt straight away that medical ophthalmologists should be relegated to a much higher position in the profession. And at the time when I came back, many of the medical ophthalmologists came to me and said, look, we're working in the most appalling conditions. We're working in old dispensary rooms with a cardboard chart on the wall. We're just using an ophthalmoscope, a retinoscope, and this is about the limit of our conditions of work. No pensions, no policy, they were all temporarily employed by local appointments, local city and council. And so I think this is where the IMO were really very helpful. And Noel Riley, who was the CEO of the IMO at the time, and the Irish Faculty of Ophthalmologists, we got together and made an appointment with the Minister for Health, Charlie Hoy.
And Paddy, if I can just pause there for our international listeners, we just maybe paint a picture of who Charlie Hockey is and the sort of character he was? Well, Dermot, I'll ask Dermot to do that, because this is an important bit, really, of this story.
I mean, I suppose he was a Trump-like character, really. He was a bit of a rogue. But I think he got the measure of you, really, as well, didn't he? Because looking at the book, I kind of got the feeling you guys didn't want optometry doing much dilating or prescribing. But of course, I think, was that part of your deal, so you could get a deal for the ophthalmologists and get them good contracts?
Well, there were two aspects to this. First of all, there was great concern amongst the ophthalmologists that optometrists shouldn't really be in a position to examine and make diagnoses about children. We all found examining children to be, very, very tricky, very technically difficult to do. And to diagnose problems with children's eyes is a very great specialty. And we felt that optometrists really were not in a position at that moment in time, not to be able to do this. And we objected very strongly to optometrists being the right to take over the management of these patients. And we objected, and that was the basis on which we met Charlie Hoy. But he then came back to us and said, well, look, I think they have, he said to me personally, he said, and Peter Eustace was there as well, and a group of us were there, and he said, I have no problem going to see my optometrist and having my eyes checked. I have full faith in these optometrists. And I said, well, I know you have, and because there's some very, very good optometrists, but I said, we don't think they should be, the whole service should be open to everybody because of difficulties in diagnosing things. So he said then, well, I'll tell you what about this trouble you have with the services for OMPs, medical practitioners? Oh, I said, yeah, of course we have terrible services. They're not pensionable, they're not permanent. They're all employed temporary. If they get sick, they don't get paid. I said, we need a better deal. And it was a very interesting conversation, because he suddenly turned around and he said, well, of course, we have the health boards now. He said, can't we draft them into community service? And I said, of course we can. They'd be delighted. With that moment in time, ophthalmic medical practitioners became part of the health service in this country, and they were immediately given a contract of work, permanency and pensionability. And that really was a turning point, I think, for medical ophthalmology at that time. And since then, it's boomed, as we can see here today. And there are jobs for more ophthalmologists. And the state has finally realized that ophthalmic eye health care is a very important aspect to the quality of life.
And one of the other challenges you faced, Paddy, was the fact that a third of the Irish population were under the age of 12. When you started, you'd 1,500 children on the waiting list for strabismus surgery. Can you tell us one of your strategies for improving, shall we say, productivity on your theatre lists?
Yeah, we were faced, when I came back, the incidence of squint was extremely high. There had been surveys done. If you read my book, you'll see the references. And the incidence was terribly high of refractive problems in children, and also amblyopia. And if you walked into a school's primary clinic, primary school, you would see, obviously walking in the door, that a lot of these squints were totally neglected. So the only way we could get to grips with that initially was, first of all, to have clinics where we could just line up a lot of children with, dilate them and just do quick retinoscopy on them, give them a prescription for glasses, and then have a quick look with the indirect ophthalmoscope to make sure there was nothing serious the matter with the fundus. And then, what about surgery? Well, then now we didn't have any orthopsists in our area at that time. There was one in Dublin at the eye and ear, and there was one in Cork at the eye, ear and throat. and there was no other help whatever. So we had to admit them to the hospital. We got a special ward put up in our hospital in Ardkeen, and we had 2 tables, 2 anaesthetists, and we just did these patients on 2 tables, and 1 surgeon, myself, and we rotated from one to the other, just changing the gloves, and we managed to get a huge waiting list down within a short period of time, and without any difficulty. And I think when I went to the States subsequently, and I saw what they were doing there with cataracts, where they had 2 tables and 1 surgeon rotating between 2, this is how they got the waiting list down. And there's nothing wrong with that, you know. We're looking at the situation, we're going to start doing bilateral cataract surgery. And that is totally feasible. So, you know, we were doing this with squint surgery a long time ago, and nothing ever happened. There were no complications, and the patient, of course, the parents were absolutely delighted with this because they couldn't see any future in long waiting lists.
And that wasn't your only challenge, was it? I mean, trauma in Ireland at the time, the injuries from trauma was something else. There was very little health and safety, very little guidance. You know, there was accidents happening in factories, of course, farming, lone farmers. But more particularly, I enjoyed the little about your kind of challenges you had with the GAA. You know, it took some amount of years, up to I think 2013, for the GAA to agree on helmets for to be worn. So that must have been a challenge for you over the time. But you know, if you can recount your time, the trauma you saw, and how you had to kind of push forward on getting that sorted.
And Paddy, maybe again for non-Irish listeners, you could just describe what hurling is and why there was such a predilection to facial injuries, and maybe you could liken it to hockey, field hockey. Why was it different?
Well, I think the difference between hockey and hurling is that hurling is an over the head game, whereas hockey, you're not allowed to lift the hockey stick above your shoulder level. So you know, it's quite two different situations. But the hurling accidents that I started to see when I came back to Ireland were absolutely dreadful. But they were, you know, the ones that we had from broken windscreens were equally horrible. And I only 2 weeks ago in Copenhagen, I was talking to some of my colleagues there, and they were just reminding me of the times before in Europe generally, especially in Germany, where they didn't introduce laminated windscreens till quite late. In fact, I think they were after us when John Blake managed to get the government to agree to that here. And Germany were still on the standard old windscreens, and they were still getting these horrific accidents. So, yeah, the other thing about accidents is, you know, it's nothing to do with us. We don't cause the accidents, so we just end up having to repair these eyes after these horrible accidents. And we, unfortunately, in Waterford, for a long number of years with Waterford Crystal, we had a huge number of eye injuries, a lot of them not very serious, but we also did have a lot of heavy industry come to Waterford about that time, and and the agricultural aspect of it was terrible. I was just talking to somebody recently. It's hard to believe that these accidents are still happening because people still don't wear the protective glasses that they should be wearing. And I think John was telling me the other day that they had a couple of intraocular foreign bodies they had to remove in Waterford in agricultural workers because they were just hammering with a hammer on a piece of steel. It's hard to imagine that. And we also heard a very nice talk in Waterford at the opening of the Cataract Centre last week from Garrett Higgins, who showed about 4 cases of dreadful burns of the eye from Lyme, just spread by farmers on the fields without no protection whatever. desperate corneal injuries from lime burns.
So there's still a bit of work to do.
There's an awful lot of work to be done. But one of the things that basically I'd like to propose here is that all of you who are interested or involved in eye healthcare, you should really, in your area, make sure that you have some contact with the businesses around you and where eye protection should be used and is not being used. It is our business to be preventing these accidents. And if you have any input from if you're in your local bridge club or whatever it is, you should always, make it known that eye protection is so important. Anyway, that's just a small thing.
So, Paddy, in your quest to deal with this, the Irish Fight for Sight charity, you have enlisted the help of 4 presidents of Ireland. And that patronage. But though I'm interested, just as we've round up here, to talk about a meeting you had with another president, maybe less reputable president, on your trip to Libya. Your encounter with Mr. Gaddafi, President Gaddafi.
Yes, that's another chapter in the book which might interest some of you. Yeah, it's interesting that I was very friendly with an ophthalmologist, a Swiss ophthalmologist, who in Geneva, who was he was the ophthalmologist in Switzerland who had a special relationship with Libyans, and a lot of the politicians and people in Libya who had very bad eye problems there was nobody in Libya to deal with them, so they used to come to Switzerland and get all their operations done there. Anyway, they asked me if I'd go to Libya with them to demonstrate phacoemulsification using the OMS phaco machine. And the company, OMS, which is an American company, decided to send a group of us, French surgeons and myself, to Libya to demonstrate how to do phaco and utilize phaco machines. So I thought this was a great opportunity. It just happened to be that we were selling meat to Libya on the hoof from Waterford at the time, and they were selling guns to the IRA.
We weren't meant to mention that, Paddy.
And the IDU or the UDA at the same time. So, we were extremely welcome, can I say, from that point of view. And eventually, anyway, I got there by hook or by crook. It's all written up.
You had to go to Algeria, didn't you? You flew to Algeria, whisked across the border in blacked out windscreen Mercedes.
Yeah, it was all very, very under the cover. You never knew. I was phoned up at 10 o'clock on a winter's evening around Christmas, and they said, "Can you go to Libya next week?" And I didn't know who it was, and said, "Oh, Dr. So-and-so from Switzerland said you might like to go." And so I didn't know any more until the day before. I got another phone call to say, "Be at Dublin Airport at 7 o'clock, whatever it is. There'll be a ticket waiting for you." And we eventually arrived there, got the ticket, got on the plane, arrived in Paris. Nobody there until I walked around a bit and somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, oh yeah, are you Dr. Condon? Yeah, sure, I said. So eventually, anyway, I met up with the French ophthalmologist and a few others who suddenly came out of nowhere. And we got on a plane and flew to Algiers. And then from there we were picked up by these limousines with guys with machine guns and everything and brought to Libya. And when in the book you'll see a photograph of a magnificent new hospital they just built for eyes. Unfortunately, it wasn't functioning because the water supply wasn't working and they were tanking in water, which wasn't very clean, and they decided we couldn't operate. So we eventually just did nothing for 2 or 3 days except show videos and talk about the machine. and talk about how to do phaco. But Professor or Gaddafi, we went to see him. He invited us to his house, where we played football with his kids. Met his wife, who was a teacher, and he entertained us very nicely. Huge man, spoke perfect English, and then entertained us. Told us to go to the Roman remains there, which are absolutely magnificent, and put us on a plane to go to Chad to see some of the new hospitals they'd built in the southern parts of Libya, to inspect them, and which were superb. The other thing about Libya at that time was we questioned whether we could walk in the streets, and he said there's no problem with that, because if anybody tries to steal anything off you, the punishment is to cut their hands off.
You were now a friend at Gaddafi's, weren't you? So I think you should have been okay.
That
Paddy.
was the rule of law there at that time. Unfortunately, it didn't last too long when Gaddafi
there was a present waiting
was
for you in the plane, wasn't there, Paddy?
Oh yes,
thank you.
On departure, we were rewarded with a huge television set made in Libya, which never worked when we got it home.
So I think we can all agree, Paddy, you've been a trailblazer, not just in surgery, in preventative eye care with the Fight for Sight, etc. You know, now that you've decided to retire, you know, you've taken up golf, a bit of fishing. How's the golf going, Paddy?
The thing about golf is that I play with the same age group. I also play with younger guys who are hitting the ball twice as far as I am. But the interesting thing is that about golf, if you don't start it early in life, you'll never be good, because you can't learn the technique, the skills. You can learn them for a week, and you can look at all the YouTube videos you want, but you can't retain them as much. And as a result, you go out one day, you play very well, and you're delighted. The next day you go out, you play so dismally that you get despondent and you don't go out the following week. So it's a kind of a game of the mind more than anything else.
So many parallels with surgery, Paddy, but fortunately, at least we can provide a more consistent performance with our surgery. If it was like golf, our patients would really suffer, because even the best golfers can have a bad day. It's been an absolute pleasure to interview you in front of a home audience, and I would once again commend this fantastic book, Eye Healthcare, 90 Years of Progress. It's a brilliant read. It just gives you an insight on where we were, where we've come to, and the pioneering work done by Paddy and his colleagues. It's available on Amazon, and all the proceeds go to the Harold Ridley Foundation. Paddy, thank you for your time today, and thank you to the Irish College for our invitation.